Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to honourable members for taking the time to turn up here this afternoon. I've been a long-standing and active member of Tynwald and have served in both its branches, predominantly the House of Keys. This has enabled me to build an extensive political experience base, but also develop a comprehensive working knowledge of legislation, national strategic policies, government departments, and through various government departmental Council of Ministers and Tynwald Committee memberships. My political portfolio is thorough, in-depth, positive and dynamic, which includes presenting, moving and examining complicated and challenging legislation, positive constructive examination and scrutiny of government, national and international policies, budgetary matters, finance and economic initiatives and standards. Examination which incorporates the placing of public questions and debates where appropriate. This combines a wide range of relevant skills forged through experience and training, a skills base and competency set which would be a significant asset to the Legislative Council. I am committed to a collaborative, joint working, teamwork approach in anything I do. I'm also a pragmatist. Equality, anti-discrimination, fairness and robustness where required are all values and personal traits I have at heart, as many of you know. I'm committed to our environment, biosphere and conservation. I believe, like Lord Lisvane, that our Tynwald is in good shape, and indeed Tynwald is our unique legacy of stability, security and resilience for our future prosperity and for our community to thrive. However, for Tynwald to continue to be in good shape, it will have to be in a flux of self-improvement over time in order to continue to be effective and responsive to keep delivering positive and dynamic outcomes. We have to adapt, go through change and evolve to respond to developing situations, rising political standards, challenges and threats, both on and off island, nationally and internationally. I am no supporter of staying rooted in the past. Onwards has always been my motto, but we must learn from the past and bear those lessons in mind. That is not to say I'm adverse to change, far from it, and indeed welcome and relish it, and for our Tynwald. Not change for change's sake, but by way of evolutionary and organic development, rooted in real, definable and positive outcomes for our community and economy alike. I would bring all these key skills to the Legislative Council, aligned with stability, continuity, experience and a positive working knowledge of a legislature in all its forms. I wish to continue my work in pursuit of everything I've just laid out for my colleagues and Tynwald if re-elected, but importantly for our community and our island nation as we strive to enrich our community and progress and evolve on our journey across the international stage.
Thank you. Dr. Hayward.
Hello, my name is Michelle Hayward and I had the pleasure of meeting several of the honourable members already, and if I haven't met you yet, sorry, but I'm here now. I want to introduce myself and my reasons for standing. I'm currently the chair of Portsmouth Mary Commissioners. I've dealt with some turbulent times in Portsmouth Mary, and I serve as a representative on the Municipal Association and the Southern Pool Board. I'm also a founder member of Portsmouth Mary Business Association, and I'm chair of governors at Scoil Connemara. I haven't always lived on the Isle of Man. I grew up in the Chilterns, about as far away from the sea as you can get. When I first came to the Isle of Man, I fell in love with its natural beauty, the amazingly talented people that I met, and the sense of community that just makes everything work. And it was a far cry from West London, where I was living at the time, and I've chosen to make this my home for the last 15 years. I stood for public office in Portsmouth Mary because I wanted to bring my experience and guidance to improve services to the community I live in. I'm a strong believer that progress doesn't come from shouting on the sidelines, it comes from getting stuck in. I'm an honest and confident person who believes in the altruistic intent of public service. My background was scientific research for over 10 years, mostly at Imperial College in London. I'm a PhD doctor, not a medical one, so I'm not interested in your bad back, but if you want to talk about autoimmune diseases or genetics or malaria or HPV, I'm your girl for that one. I've got a good eye for detail, the ability to research and collate and interrogate large volumes of information from a variety of sources. My approach to decision making is to gather all the available evidence and come to the most logical, practical and rational solution. And if I find gaps in that evidence, then I'm happy to drive further research. I enjoy working with others. I wouldn't be involved in so much if I didn't, but I'm capable of independent thought, accompanied by creative thinking and a problem-solving attitude. When I arrived on the Isle of Man, I knew there wasn't a world-class research department that I was going to join, but I was quickly invited to teach in schools and then for several years at the college, where I was asked to share my knowledge and understanding of environmental issues. And our dive business attracts over 300 high-value visitors to the biosphere every year. We provide marine consultancy advice to DEFRA and Isle of Man Shipping Registry, among others. And I gave a presentation in this room about the impact of the creamery on the bay. If I'm elected, I wouldn't be running the business anymore because I see a LegCo as a full-time role. I'm currently organising a team of divers. We're heading off to Dunkirk to dive the steam packet ships that were lost 80 years ago in the evacuation down there. And in collaboration with the Steam Packet and Russian Heritage Trust, I'm leading that team. Those divers and volunteers are going to deliver what I hope will be a fitting exhibition, with all the data being submitted to the iMuseum and a book and TV coverage to follow as well. I see the role of a Legislative Council member as being a critical friend to the House of Keys. I already take this role in my role as a school governor. It involves independent oversight and ability to see the bigger picture and some constructive challenge. I believe I have the integrity, sound judgment and wide range of personal experience to be a valuable asset to Legislative Council and to Tim Moulton. I've got good commercial communication skills, and then through my government roles and local government level, I've led responses to several consultations, chaired public meetings, etc.
Thank you very much. Mrs.
Hi everyone, I'm Hafsa Hussain, and I'd like to start by thanking you all for being here this afternoon and for my nomination to the role. I've had the pleasure of meeting many of you over the last few months, and I've enjoyed learning further about the views and works and personalities present. The Isle of Man is an incredibly unique place to live and to have been brought up in. It is full of potential and opportunities, and it is through these opportunities that I have grown into the person I am today and have been able to cultivate my skills and experiences into possible contributions to the work that the Legislative Council does. Throughout my career, and I use the word career in the non-traditional sense, I have been nurtured in objectivity, analytical and logical processes, quick learning, teamwork, public speaking, and providing a critical eye, not for the sole purpose of criticising, but with a view for improvement. My experience and background in the sciences, research and IT have all aided me in standing for this position and have equipped me with the skills that a scrutiny-heavy role requires. My personal experiences and backgrounds have provided me with skills required within roles that have a political or public element. It is an amalgamation of these sides of me that I believe make me a candidate suited for a role of this nature, and if successful would relish in the opportunity to contribute to the positive evolution of the island for generations to come. And I would aim to do so by working hard and focusing on the seemingly less glamorous side of scrutiny. The role of Legislative Council members is not something that I believe has had a great deal of public awareness and can sometimes get quite negative responses. However, I believe that it's truly important for the future of the Isle of Man. With an ever-evolving society, it is vital that different perspectives, experiences and backgrounds are present or voiced within the Council and within Tynwald as well, and that is one I would like to offer. Thank you.
Mr. Greenhill.
Thank you. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, honourable members, thank you all for spending your valuable time meeting with me over the last few weeks. I'm addressing you all today after giving much thought to what I could personally add to the cognitive diversity of the Tynwald Court. Although we have members with excellent skills and experience in many different areas, I felt that in a rapidly changing international business environment, there was a significant gap that I could help to fill. Starting right now and continuing over the next few years, the impact of Brexit will provide significant opportunities, but also significant challenges to the Isle of Man economy. A strong growing economy is vital to the island. Companies growing their staff levels and new companies setting up here has a major knock-on effect. It creates more jobs, not just in advocates, accountants and recruitment companies, but also in shops, in trades, restaurants, schools, healthcare, the whole island. This multiplier effect of every pound that is earned and spent here is what generates the money that then can be spent on healthcare, education, infrastructure, addressing climate change and being able to handle events such as the coronavirus, and the collapse of Flybe. I strongly believe that my experience, work ethic and personal skills can really help with the legislation that will enable the island to succeed and prosper through these demanding times. My wife and I moved to this wonderful island 7 years ago when we increased the number of green hills by the sea and green hills encircling our flocks by 2. I was contracted by the Department for Enterprise to move here as Chief Executive Officer for e-business and e-gaming and to grow those sectors on island and attract new companies and their staff. After 2.5 years, I returned to the private sector to continue that mission, but of course I stayed here. I have also had the privilege to serve as a member of the Arts Council for around 18 months now, as I have a deep belief in what the arts can do to help those of any age and any ability, and how we can gain as a person by performing or appreciating the arts. In addition to my work on Ireland, I've continued with my long service as a football referee, where I'm used to around 50% of people disagreeing with my actions and my decisions, which may help me and prepare me if I'm successful in the elections next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, first question, Mr. Robichaud.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to all the candidates to express their thoughts about the scrutiny role of council. But of course there is that other role once a month where you could be deeply engaged in Tynwald and a whole variety of different subjects and debates. Could each of you give us confidence that you will be comfortable in such an environment?
So, confident in Tynwald and in the scrutiny role, Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chris, for the question. Yes, as many of you will know, I've a committed member to Tynwald and have had positive and constructive input into debates of the nature you just outlined, and it's certainly, I feel, the Legislative Council member's role, as defined in our Tynwald job description, to take part in such debates, put your knowledge, your experience, working knowledge, departmental knowledge if necessary, into that debate, because you want to add value, you want to test, probe, see what the policy, strategy or the report, it could be a select committee report, it could be something you agree with, so you want to add supportive comment. But it's a Legislative Council member role to do that. But critically, such as we saw in the initial climate change debate, Legislative Council has a pivotal role in balancing the power of the executive and placing a check and balance on that. And Tynwald is a critical place for that to take place, should it be necessary, where the Legislative Council have a view at variance with the executive, and it must be for genuine and positive reasons. They may have a mistake may be spotted, an addition may be required to that policy or report that's being presented, and Legislative Council can provide that second look in doing that. And as we saw in the climate change initial debate, it caused a pause in proceedings for a while, further dialogue and so on, and we progressed to a more positive, I think extremely positive outcome in that. And that's a key feature of, I feel, of Legislative Council that's often missed in the wider world. And our Tynwald work is critically important to add value to those kind of debates and so on.
Dr. Hayward.
I think I'd welcome the chance to discuss a variety of subjects that was greater than where I normally end up. For those of you who come from a local authority background, you'd be aware that it's often restricted to seagulls and streetlights and when the bins are going to be emptied. And that doesn't mean
have
that
our moments as well.
Yes, I'm sure you do. I'm trying to move on for that. I absolutely would love to be very confident of being involved in a variety of different subjects. I have a wide experience that cuts across various different government roles, and I relish a healthy debate. In my role as chair, I always spend lots of time trying to referee debates, but it's always nice to actually get the positive contributions coming through and building a case, as well as to get those that will challenge and perhaps cause pause for thought. I think one of the important things is to keep that flow moving. Very often I know that we've ended up where you do have to stop, think about whether there's further evidence required, whether somebody's just raised a point that just completely throws you for a second, and whether you need to actually delay and then rejoin that debate later on. So yeah, very comfortable in that setting and be happy to contribute.
Ms. Houston.
I think that yes, obviously Tynwald, taking part in Tynwald is a part of the role, and I've personally always been brought up to have debates and take part in debates, and even if that's personally within my family setting, we were always encouraged to ask questions and maybe not necessarily just agree to what was being said, but ask the questions that needed to be asked. I'm not afraid to ask questions, and I'm also not afraid to stand up for something if I think that it's right. I'm not afraid to give my support, and I wouldn't be in that situation afraid to give my support to members on various range of topics. I obviously don't have the political background or the experience of being in a setting like Tynwald, or being a member of the House of Keys or of the council. So I would be coming in as an outsider, but I think that would bring a fresh perspective to it as well. And I'm not really someone that tends to stay silent if I think that something needs to be said.
Thank you. Mr. Beale.
Sitting in fourth position, it's like I should turn around and say I agree with everybody else. I agree with Nick Clegg or whatever. But I think I do agree with everybody, because I think it's very important for individuals sitting in Tynwald to be able to ask the right questions, to listen to what's going on, but to be prepared before you sit down. We know what those questions are going to be. To do your homework on that, to be ready for those questions, I think is vital. But be prepared to make your point, ask the right questions of the right people. Perhaps you might already have asked some of those questions in private beforehand, but when it comes to the stage, if that needs to be said, then I'm very happy about doing that. That's part of what I've been doing all my life. Thank you.
Okay, question 2, Mrs. Kane.
Thank you. Hello, thanks for coming on today. I'd like to know your view on Legislative Council. Do we need it in Parliament, and should it be publicly elected?
So the old classic, Legislative Council, do we need it, and should it be publicly elected? First up, Dr. Hayward.
There are two thoughts about what the role of government actually is, and one of those is that the role of government is to protect people from the harms they would do to themselves. The other one is that government is there to protect people from harms that business would do to them in pursuit of profit. And I actually think there should be a third element that kicks into this, that there needs to be a check and balance within government to make sure that government is not foisting any of that inequalities or inequities in the policies that it sets. So I undoubtedly think that legislators have a role to play. I think it's absolutely vital that you have a system of scrutiny and checks and balances, and just the ability to have that second glance at it with different perspectives and with different eyes. I'm well aware of how things work when you're in a committee sense, that actually things can be politically driven, and sometimes you will get pulled along a route that perhaps isn't necessarily going to achieve the outcome that you wanted. I think having that second pair of eyes there would be absolutely what should happen. But it needs to be, as a critical phrase, it needs to be that supportive role. It's not there to be antagonistic, but what we all want is the best outcome for all of our economy and for all of our residents. And so that's where the driving is to be.
Ms. Houston.
To the first part of that question, do I think that Legislative Council is needed? And the answer to that would be yes, because I'm here. And I think that it is needed, and I think it's important to have a sense of objectivity, and maybe have the function of what I've learned throughout my research of what the role of the members of LegCo are. And do I think that it should be publicly elected? I think there's definitely quite a loud voice within the public at the moment that it should be publicly elected. And I, if it was to be publicly elected in the future, if that was the process that was how to get elected, that would have been the process that I would be engaging with, because I believe that I have skills suited for this role rather than that of an MHK. I do think that it should be noted as well that even though it's not directly elected, members of Legislative Council are elected by members of the House of Keys, which are directly elected in the public by the public, and have kind of been given that go ahead to make decisions, and that for the sake of the constituents and for the Isle of Man as a whole.
Thank you. Mr. Greenhill.
So to the point again, is it needed? Yes. What should we be doing? We'd be doing checks and balances, and obviously scrutiny. Should it be elected by the public? It's an interesting one. I think we need a process that encourages the most suitable and skilled people to stand. And then we need a process to elect those that are the most suitable and skilled into those positions. Now, I'm not actually certain yet what that process should be. I'd like to hear proposals about how that could be done to be better than we're doing today. If that's the case, I would be backing that straight away.
Thank you. Mr Henderson.
Thank you, and thank you, Daphne, for that. In my experience of Tynwald, Keys and the Legislative Council, I would consider this the current situation as the best option for the island, keeping what we have, but on an improved format, provides the best mechanism to meet our unique sets of community, national and international needs. To provide the best legislation that we can, it must benefit from a second look, from a second tier of scrutiny, and that's where the Legislative Council adds value to the whole process, in my experience, where legislation can be reviewed, examined, scrutinised, changed or supported, and certainly in the recent past amendments have been made in the Legislative Council, gone back to Keys have accepted them, and the whole process has been strengthened by that second review. Lord Lisvane himself, when he examined Tynwald, said we were in good shape, and in his report let it clear the Legislative Council or second chamber or second tier scrutiny should be kept as part of the added value to that process. I personally believe that in order to give the community the best legislation that we can, the best legislative framework, it does require a second look. And we shouldn't be afraid of that. We should welcome and support it. The public elected issue I find intensely interesting because I've been through several reviews previously, and even Lisvane has suggested that we keep to the current system that we have, whereby the House of Keys is the electoral college. I'd support that to an extent because that gives Legislative Council a democratic element. It's part of the House of Keys members' remit when they're elected. The public expect them to elect members to the Legislative Council.
Thank you. So it's 2 minutes for
Okay, Mr.
responses
Speaker.
to questions.
I could say a lot more on that.
Question 3, and Ms Costain.
Yes, thank you. Question, a political question, so really it's just for Mr Henderson, if that's okay.
Well, we're going to have to give every candidate the opportunity
Okay,
to
that's fine then. A broad question then would be, can you justify why you think you'd be the correct person for the role of an MLC? But the question I would really like to ask, which is a political question to Mr Henderson, is that question, but given his behaviour over dependability and an area which he had political responsibility for, and the fact that it caused his minister to give a public apology to me for the abuse I suffered in Tynwald, could he justify why he thinks he's, why his behaviour in that regard still makes him applicable for the position?
I'm not going to allow that question.
Okay.
Mr Hooper, question 4. Sorry.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. So this is going to be an odd question to ask because obviously the bill is currently in post. The question that I want to ask is if people could, the candidates could maybe give us an example from the last few years where they've used the skills that they are saying or why they're here, where they've used those skills in the past 5 years or so to say, give us a demonstration of actually what it is that they think makes them suitable for this role. There's a concrete example of that actually in practice. And for Bill, I suppose that his version of the question is one thing that he's done over the last 5 years that actually directly resulted from his action, because again it's the same question, just in a slightly different context.
Okay. So an example of the skills that make you suitable in action. So firstly, if I can ask Ms Houston to answer that.
So to answer this question, it would be looking back at my time as a PhD candidate, and as part of that process you are given something at the beginning and you're giving a broad idea of what you want your project to be, and then you then have to kind of get further and deeper into that and go into the research of it and figure out how you really want it to go and where you want it to go. And so I think that really shows and displays the research element side of it, and actually providing evidence, as well as that to be able to actually qualify as as a PhD candidate, you have to pass several checks along the way. So you have to be able to present your evidence to a room full of, well, not a room full of people, but in this case a room full of people, but a panel of 3 or 4 people, and you have to justify why you've made the choices, why you have decided to go down a particular route and not other routes, and not just show the evidence of justifying why you've done what you've done, but as well the justification of why you decided not to do the other bits. So I think that really does display some of the skills that I can bring to that.
Mr. Greenhill.
I could start off probably on areas of scrutiny that I've been doing. So in my time on the island, my experience has been into looking at the work permits and helping to turn that into specially skilled non-residents coming to work here. There were various changes that had to be done to the Gambling Duty Act when the UK started regulating gaming. But then I was behind the changes to Designated Businesses Act regarding protection related to cryptocurrencies and blockchain development. So that was an area that I was pushing onto the island, but we had to put things in place to make sure that was correct. Since then, there's been many areas of international law that will affect people here and across the world, and things like GDPR, FATCA, and what we're seeing now in the Isle of Man Income Tax Substance Requirements Act order that's coming through. Those are things that affect people here, and those are things I've had work with companies and before that with government on trying to make those go through. The other thing I've been doing across the time I've been here is promoting the island. So that's globally promoting the island to bring people to move here and grow their companies.
Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think inside and outside of Tynwald I've demonstrated the use of positive use of self and a various range of skills in my work for disabled charity outside of here, the former Manx Foundation for the Disabled, and also my conservation work and assistance with Manx Wildlife Trust, Manx BirdLife, etc. But certainly, I think, as many of you know, I've put my skills into direct use, certainly within Tynwald, and certainly with my input into debates such as vulnerable people, young people at risk, elderly at risk, and also in regards to mental health issues, and certainly vulnerable people who suffer from mental health, and supportive of associations and so on. I've also launched my own debates in Tynwald at various times and looked at homeless issues, empty property issues, and a whole range of issues. I've become, but constructively involved, not on a destructive path, because I believe team working and collaborative working is the way and secret to success here. And I've also had the humility when working on the likes of Treasury to recognise the issues as have been outlined with dependability and the occupational health assessment process for benefits in the past, and have actively been involved in ceasing those processes, contrary to some reports, and have the process reviewed and supported the actions on that in recognising immediately when they were brought to our attention to actually cease that and go down a new path. And I've certainly on record as apologising for any concerns, as many members will know as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Hayward.
In my local government role, I've tackled taking on the standing orders, which I think have been around for years, although they're meant to be due to annual review. I've gone through that. I've taken a variety of different standing orders that I've looked at from other places. I've worked through the legislation to see, in terms of those rules, how they worked. There were some huge anomalies that I think have been historically tinkered with. So it involves stripping it back to the basics to make it so that we could actually get through a sensible meeting structure. I also then chair in a variety of formats, and within the school context we work on the school improvement plan, which includes review and check and balance to see how that's working going forward, and we do a self-assessment exercise, and that involves taking evidence from a number of people that come in, the teaching staff, the support staff within school. And so I'm used to, in a variety of formats, allowing people to have their say, allowing them to present their case, and then incorporating that into what the task is set for the committee. I think I have a great deal of skills in leading and coordinating teams of people into work, and I'm quite happy to be a team player as well.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Robert Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to have to nuance this question slightly for Bill, otherwise it won't make much sense. I hope you can bear with me, Mr. Speaker, on this one. My question is in two parts. What chance have you had to consider the work of Tynwald 1 and Legco 2 in terms of operationally? How have you engaged in that? And what are your observations? And with regard to Bill's adjustment to the question, how would you want to see improvements on what we do now?
I'll put the full question to all the candidates, including the element about improvements, if they have any observations on that, just to make sure that it is a fair, level playing field. And we'll start with Mr. Greenhill, please.
Okay, in terms of being able to observe what's going on, since I put my name forward, I've attended every House of Keys meeting, every Legco meeting, and every Tynwald meeting, apart from those on the 4th of February, because I'm actually in London doing some work on a major conference and trying to bring in some people here. Some of those meetings were very interesting indeed. There was one on the domestic abuse bill, where people were invited to give input, and I was listening to that very, very carefully. So there were interviews online with people providing information, some ideas about what could help in changing the bill. I found that incredibly interesting. The other side of things is watching interaction across the floor that I've seen in Tynwald and in the House of Keys, and that, I believe, is a very interesting thing. It doesn't help enough to listen on the radio. You need to see how people are interacting, body language that goes on, and how people actually really do react. Seeing the eyebrows raised at various different times is obviously very interesting. In terms of improvement, that's a difficult one to come up with immediately, but I would say people talking together outside the chambers as well as inside. I presume that happens a lot. I can't tell that side of it, but I would hope that's happening, because that should move things along in a better way.
Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Chris. Well, I consider the work of Tynwald, certainly from a Legislative Council point of view, very important, as I've already illustrated to a previous answer, and Legislative Council can obviously provide considerable resource to a Tynwald debate, experience, knowledge and so on, and add value, and it does provide that check to the Executive as far as that goes. The work of the Legislative Council, again, after spending most of my time in the House of Keys and comparing what happens in the Legislative Council, vitally important work. If we want to produce a national legislative framework that is fit for purpose, addresses issues in the community, fleet of foot, flexible and so on, then you have to be able to give it that second look. You have to be able to review it and have the best we can, as I said. And I believe a second chamber, whether it be Legislative Council or otherwise, that provides that, and I can see the value of it, having worked in there for the past few years. Improvements, we've seen vast improvements and changes since the Lisvane report, most of which I've been supportive of, and I'd like to see more done and move forward. We can't stay rooted in the past, and we need to be going forward. How those improvements would take shape, I think time's going to tell, and the challenges and issues that we face going forward in our community, and the test against our political system. Is it flexible enough? Is it dynamic enough? And there may well be further changes to be made. I'm not averse to change, and I relish it, as long as it's not change for change's sake.
Thank you. Dr. Hay.
I haven't been able to attend because I actually was working, so I listened to the debates, but I listened to them on catch-up, so that's what you do late night in Port St Mary, in case anyone was wondering. I find it fairly easy to follow discussions, particularly follow the discussion on the assisted dying proposal, and I think it was interesting and moving discussion, and it was, you could see the discussion evolving as that went on. In terms of improvements, I think from the initial meetings that I've had with everyone, I think there's still perceived to be a little bit of a conflict between the Keys and Legco at times, and that shouldn't be the way that it is. Legco shouldn't be seen to be dominating Keys' decisions. And I know that when legislation is bounced back again for further checks, that can suddenly extend the time frame, and that can be seen as almost keeping things into touch. And perhaps it's something to look at procedurally there, that it can't then be that Keys feel, well, we're going to force it through anyway, but that there should still be that ability to get legislation passed in a timely fashion.
And Ms. Houston.
So I've been fortunate enough to actually be able to attend a few of the Tynwald sittings and be able to, because I am working full-time, well part-time while trying to do this, being able to listen to the sittings of Legco and Keys, and for me, I think I agree with what Peter said, is that actually being able to be there and see it visually does add another dimension onto it, to be able to understand why the discussion has gone the way that it has. I think in terms of improvements, I'd like to see the chance for more open debate to be able to happen, and I think it's really great that Legco are actually looking to review how it functions and the business that it deals with. I'd like to see possibly more collegiate working between the members within Legco, and as well between Legco and the Keys as well.
Thank you. Question 5, Mrs. Kane.
Matters of policy are usually decided in Tynwald with a vote of both branches. Do you see the role of legislative council members as one to support the Keys, support the government, or would you be prepared to rock the boat?
So, role of legislative council in policy decisions in Tynwald. First one on, Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Daphne. There's no straightforward answer to that, because yes, if you're doing an impartial scrutiny role and that's part of your job description, yes, you should be able to stand up and put your head above the parapet, but in a constructive way, not in a fly off the handle sort of destructive deconstruction of, say, a government policy per se. You have to put valid and cogent reasons for why you're objecting to a certain policy, or it could be a select committee report, or a general report to Tynwald as well. If it's a fair policy produced by government and you believe in what they're doing is correct and correct for the community, yes, I've stood up and supported government policy on many occasions, with my full belief and support behind those. I forgot what your third item was, Daphne. Would you rock the boat, support government policy?
Support Keys.
And certainly, where necessary, I believe legislative council role is to support Keys where it can, and in a consultative basis, advisory basis if necessary. If it's a Keys backbencher producing the policy or a motion in Tynwald, I'm on record as supporting the backbenchers, drivers and initiatives, certainly on vulnerable people and mental health issues, for instance.
Dr. Hayward.
I think in order for Legco to have a value, it has to be able to fulfil all of those functions as and when appropriate. Legco should be seen as those non-executive directors. They're not sat there to make policy per se, but they are sat there to make sure that the policy is heading the right direction. And sometimes that can mean needing to have the courage to say, well, actually, have you considered, and where is this going? And that may be it's the extra perspective. You are a fairly small legislation overall, and it needs every member to have input into that in order to make it function as well as it does.
Ms. Houston.
I think that, yes, I think that if there were cases where the council was there, they should be able to support Keys, and in turn that would be the general public. I think that the idea of would I be prepared to rock the boat is, I think if it was needed, yes. If it's something that I felt needed to be said, then I'm not opposed to actually standing up and saying that. I think that the way that we move forward as a society is actually listening to different opinions and listening to listen, not just listening to speak, but actually taking them on board. And sometimes that it's not always about the opinions or the side that's screaming the loudest. It's sometimes someone needs those other sides to stand up and say something. And as well, if you are going to stand up and say something, you should probably have something to back you up on why you're saying it, so don't just be screaming for no reason.
Mr. Greenhill.
To add to what's been said already, if I fundamentally disagreed with something that's been put forward, I'd take the time to go through that with the proposer before the meeting in either Tynwald or in Legco. I think it's important to understand why that's being put forward, and also for me to be able to explain why I was fundamentally disagreeing with it. Hopefully things could be sorted out at that level, and then taken forward from there. If, for example, it did happen that we did still disagree, I would be making my point, but it's a matter of how you make that point.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Hooper.
So, just talking about policy here, it just occurs to me to ask about a specific policy just to get some perspective on it. So, one of the things that's recently being quite hotly debated in Tynwald and is likely to continue to be so in the very near future is the issue of the Alabama Post Office. I'm just curious as to what each candidate's perspective is on the debate itself. I'm not asking you to come down on one side or the other. I'm interested in what your perspective is on the issues and what it is that the core of the debate is actually focusing on.
Okay. So your perspective on the post office debate and the issues raised. First of all, Dr. Haley.
The Isle of Man Post Office is one of those examples where you've got a clash between trying to run something as a business, and that involves obviously using business metrics, and that doesn't necessarily sit well with trying to run something that has a societal role as well, which we are terribly bad at measuring, and economists have tried, but it's a very difficult thing to put a figure on social capital, and yet that's one of the key factors. And that social capital is why people get involved and get emotive about subjects, because they can feel that, even if they can't quantify it and we can't put a spreadsheet together. So I think it's a debate that, you're right, will carry on rumbling on, because at the moment those two sections are very definitely apart, and there is no way of trying to find pathways, or I hope there could be ways to find pathways, but there isn't any current pathway where they're talking about the same thing. So you're having a debate about different things, and that's going to polarise the debate enormously.
Mrs.
I think that yes, it's obviously a debate that's going to go on for quite some time, and to echo what Michelle said, that it is part of trying to run a business and part of putting society and having a social aspect to it. I think at this point it would be knowing it. I think my perspective on it would be actually coming down to what is a suitable compromise for both sides, because sometimes and it should happen is that neither side is going to get all.
What do you mean neither side?
So in terms of the
Sorry.
so the business side and socially, I think that if you're having a debate, so the different sides of the debate are never, or the outcome of a debate should never be that one side wins it all. It should be that there should be a suitable compromise and a understanding reached at the end of it.
Mr. Greenhill.
Well, it's certainly an area that's getting a lot of publicity at the moment. It's clear that the role and the operation of the post office has changed dramatically over recent years, with email and social media technology replacing large parts of income stream and therefore profitability of the post office. So things have to change there to keep something being offered, but how that's put forward and how we take care of all the problems that occur with individuals, that has to be done. It has to be done quickly.
Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we're at a bit of a dichotomy here because we have a TINMOD approved strategy for the way forward for the Isle of Man Post Office. They put the strategy, it's approved, and as we've heard and we know, the fortunes of the post office have been waning, unfortunately, due to technology and the drop in hard copy mail, if you like, parcels and so on. And the post office board have to make changes to try and survive and go forward into the future. They've got no choice about that. You can't just sit on a package that is losing money, and they've tried their very best, and I argue that from their point of view. From a community point of view, then we've got to look at the social value of what we are losing as well, which has been put forward by various constituency MHKs, and I can see that too, where the community hub, in their view, has been lost. And then another element into the equation, and that's neighbourhood focused or centred areas, community hub again. How are we going to re-energise community hub? What does neighbourhood focused areas look like? How could post office services or contracted out services look going into a community hub neighbourhood focused area, as we've heard in the strategic plans, for instance? There's a whole range of options to look at there, and it's easy just to throw bricks in, but when you're in the middle of something, trying to manage your way out of being in deficit and to save as many jobs as you possibly can, then we've reached a sort of almost loggerhead position on this, and I believe there's a lot more talking, a lot more negotiating, not more work with, say, the Cabinet Office on what neighbourhood focused areas would look like.
Thank you very much. Next question, Ms Edge.
Thank you. I'd like to ask everyone whether what their view is of working on a department, whether they would work on a department, and what they could contribute to a department if they did choose to go that way.
Okay, so would you work in a department and what could you contribute to that? Starting off with Ms Houston.
So I think my view on this stems from my understanding of what the role within LegCo is, which, as I understand it, would be to be a scrutiny-focused role and creating a better balance with regards to members of TINWAL being in departments. I believe that in order to provide good scrutiny of legislation and through scrutiny committees, it's really important that you try and maintain some objectivity. And there's also the element that LegCo members aren't directly elected by the public, so there would be some friction in that regard. Personally, I don't think it's something that I would do. I wouldn't want to be sitting in a department. I acknowledge that the experience of understanding the background of how a department works and what has gone on in the formulation of a bill or policy would be beneficial, and on the other side of that, the benefit to a department in gaining the skills from someone from LegCo, but I think that those benefits can be achieved in other ways. For example, if members of Legislative Council were called in by a department to offer a critical eye based on their unique skill set for a particular piece that's trying to go through.
Thank you. Mr Green.
Certainly the key functions of LegCo are to promote, examine and scrutinise new legislation, to scrutinise government and to support the House of Keys. But in addition, I'd fully understand why members may be called on to take roles in government or TINWAL. If ministers actually believe that my skill set and experience in international business and development of the island's economy, and if that would be most beneficial if I was to help out there, then I'd certainly be listening to ministers in that respect and trying to provide my help wherever I could.
Mr Henderson.
Yes, I believe MLCs should work on their government departments as far as practical. We've got a TINWAL approved job description, and we've had the functions of TINWAL debates where it was put firmly forward that MLCs should be allowed to work on departments if they so wished. I believe actually we should, as far as practical, work on government departments, and certainly embrace that responsibility and relish it. We can all bring our own sets of experiences and key skills, as we've just heard, and into a departmental setting we can add value to those departmental values departmental meetings. We can add value to it. We can scrutinise, examine, challenge, as we do in LegCo. Constructively, I add again, so that whatever policy and strategy has been presented, it's been tested, and tested from a different viewpoint. Working in department gives you invaluable experience, in my view, and it's an experience you can bring into legislative council then with an understanding and working of government that you can apply in how you perform your scrutiny and examination role in LegCo. And transversely, your work in LegCo gives you an experience and knowledge base that is well suited also to work in a department and understand each process and enable you from a departmental point of view to sponsor legislation from that department into legislative council, which is quite an invaluable thing from a departmental point of view, rather than having to go around 8 members trying to find out who would like to sponsor this legislation. So it's incredibly useful from that point of view.
Thank you. Dr. Hayward.
The short answer is yes, be prepared to work in a department if it was the right fit. So if that minister felt that I had something that I could offer, that there was a role that I could fulfil, that would be fine. It would be invaluable experience to see how a department functioned, but you'd hope that the department is gaining something back from you as well. There is then the prospect of taking legislation forward and sort of necessarily smoothing the pathway, but guiding that legislation through LegCo, but with an understanding of how that policy has been developed and how it's been derived, which may well smooth things. I think the possible proposal from the emoluments review, that the departmental uplift was going to be removed, that tends to remove some of the problems that I would have with members being members of department, because there isn't a possibility that you're feeling financially compelled to stick with what's going on, and perhaps will make you more able to challenge within the department and to help guide things along the right way.
Thank you. The next question, Mr. Shimmons.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the candidates, you're applying for a role which in my view carries a generous salary and allowance package, which is of course funded by the max taxpayer. Would you resign all other paid employment that you have, and would you resign any memberships you have for other boards or organisations to ensure you have no conflicts of interest?
Okay, would you give up other paid employment and other commercial interests, I think was the gist of the question. Mr. Greenhill.
Okay, looking at that one, paid employment, there's a couple of unpaid jobs that I would have to give up. I think one of those is, or the main one is on the Arts Council. So I give a lot of my time to the Arts Council at the moment, and I understand I'd need to step down from there. In terms of anything that would cause a problem with the other things that I'm doing, I don't think there are any issues of that, and I would raise that with people. So at the moment I have some non-exec directorships. I don't think there's any conflicts there, but I would obviously check that with people, and if necessary I would step down from those.
Okay, Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Bill, for the question. Obviously I'm already have been in this role full-time up until recently, but entering the House of Keys, I resigned my health service position in recognition that Keys work was certainly a full-time position, and if the same thing was now and I was at my hospital, the answer is yes, because what I knew about Legislative Council Tynwald and what I certainly know now and what I put into my job, it's certainly a full-time position, and there's no way I'd consider having anything else on the side, or memberships to associations or otherwise that would cause a conflict, and if so, certainly I'd resign those as well, because I want to be able to perform this role impartially, transparently, and to the best ability I can without being fettered to any particular issue, and focus on what I'm doing.
Thank you. Dr. Hayward.
I'm currently doing supply teaching for the Department of Education, and that would have to go. Might be a surprise to the students in Q2 a week on Friday, if that's the case. I'll get their first lesson off. But I'm also, I do private tuition, and I've got students who are prepping for the exams at the moment, and this is where I wouldn't step away from them. They have 8 weeks until they've got exams. Some of those children are depending on A-level results to go to university, and it would be morally wrong of me to walk away and leave them in the lurch for the short term that it's needed to get them through their exams. So that I would hold on to. My dive business is co-owned with my husband, and he would take over running that entirely, so I'd have nothing to do with it on a day-to-day basis. If there were any conflicts of interest, just as we deal with them in every other sphere, I would obviously declare that that was the case.
Susan.
Yes, I would resign from any full-time paid employment or any paid employment that I have if I was successful, and I don't have any other commitments I think that are of conflict of interest, and if I did I would declare them and step away from them if needed.
Thank you. Next question I have, Mr. Peake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is about pay structure. I think you've all indicated to me when we've spoken before that you've read the report for the Emoluments Committee. And I'd like to know how you, if that came forward to you, and how you vote for that, and what your reasons would be for voting yes or no.
Okay, your view on the emoluments report. We'll start with Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think it certainly does need a debate, and there's many views round Tynwald that I've discovered when discussing this with honourable members, and I don't know whether I'm not skirting the question, Ralph, but I'm just thinking when that debate comes, I think there may well be scope for many amendments to that, and a further look and more in-depth look into what we're trying to achieve here. So it's a difficult answer. I suppose yes in a way, but then I believe in the operation of fairness, equality, the Employment Act that we operate and put to, those standards are put to all other government employees as well. So I think in initialising something like this, we need to be aware of what standards we're applying to our own colleagues, and are they fair, proper and proportionate in what we're doing? Do they reflect accurately all the roles and functions of everybody and how we do them? There's been a lot of questions and sort of negative observations on that report as well, although as I say, I believe Tynwald members' pay should be fair and it should reflect their duties and responsibilities. So I haven't got an issue such as a pay gap between MHKs and Legislative Council members. It's how it's achieved, how it's affected, and is it a fair process by way that would be derived at. So we've got to be careful, I would say, how we do that. Just breaking something or using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, I also think the Emoluments Committee's panel were under such a time constraint that they've produced, in my view, half a report when we need to go out to a bit more in depth.
Dr. Hayward.
Obviously the Emoluments Committee had set up the independent review, and I think we need to respect that independent review document, although I do worry a little bit that perhaps the remit for the panel was quite narrow, and that may cause some issues going forward in trying to come to some consensus. I think a simplified structure would be a good idea. I think it needs to be perhaps clearer, and that will help members of the public certainly be a little bit more settled with it. I do wonder if there was some scope in there for grading roles, because I think having spoken to various people, the hours and the commitment that people put in seems to almost be a personal thing. It depends on your constituency work, it depends on which scrutiny committees you end up involved in, and all of those things are adding to workload, and I'm not sure that just trying to pull very narrow job titles necessarily reflects that. So I'm going to sit on the fence if I may, because I think it's a complicated structure.
Skip my views, Ms. Houston.
So I think that it's something that definitely requires a little bit more debate and would probably have quite a big discussion about it. But if you're asking me for a decision now, and if we were in vote, if I was to vote and just based on what I know now, I would have to say that, yes, I probably would agree with it. I think that MHKs do have a larger, more 27 role to play when dealing with constituents, which, as it stands, MLCs do not have in such a official capacity. And you know, there should be a difference within the salary in order to support that. I do think that, like with any that's not a word, with any job or role, the remuneration should match should match the effort required for the role, and I'm aware that both roles require commitment and focus in order to do the job well. I think that if an expense allowance is to be offered, there should probably have more accountability and transparency around that. And I do know that the aim of Legislative Council and Tynwald as a whole wants to be able to be reflective of the population of the Isle of Man and of the society that we have, and so it should be taken into account that any remuneration offered for the positions should be of an amount that appeals and satisfies prospective candidates from lots of different backgrounds and areas.
Thank you. Mr. Greenhill.
Firstly, I certainly thought that the changes to the expenses needed to be made, so that's a positive in that respect, and cleaned up. Secondly, we were talking earlier about a simplified structure. I just wonder if it has been simplified too much and not recognising the differences between individuals and what they're providing. But I certainly believe, and it's a personal feeling, that the gap between the MHK and MLC salaries should have been wider to acknowledge the specific additional work that MHKs actually perform for the constituents. Just a personal view.
Yeah. The next question, Mr. Robert Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard a lot this afternoon. I'm grateful about people's competencies and also everybody talking to procedures. But really this is an attempt to speak to individuals' political souls, really. In pushing aside stuff that politically has been dealt with at the moment, like COVID-19 and Flybe, and also the big stuff like health, climate, what are you passionate about?
Okay. What are you passionate about? Do you have a political soul? Dr. Hayward.
Well, do you want to ask the people down in Portsmouth Mary about whether I have a political soul or not? Do I have a political soul? I'm passionate about fairness, and I'm going to sound like a toddler at this stage, because my biggest rant as an adult is to stand there and go, that's just not fair. And I don't stamp my feet anymore, I've got over that now, but I actually believe fundamentally in that fairness across the fairness in terms of opportunity and the fairness in terms of access to education and the health services. I think all of that absolutely drives. I don't think we should have a society that sits in any way that discriminates against part of the society.
Ms. Houston.
I think I have to agree with that. Do I have a political soul? I'm not sure whether having one is a good thing or a bad thing. But I think if you're asking what I'm passionate about, what I'm passionate about is the Isle of Man and looking at the Isle of Man and how it can. It's a great place as it is, but we have to acknowledge that there are places where there could be improvements, and how can we make that better? And I think that part of that is actually having a society where everyone feels at the same level, or everyone feels equal, and everyone feels that they have, I guess, the rights to be part of society. And you know, that's what I'm passionate about. I would like to see a society and population that is tolerant and is diverse, and that in every sense of the way that could mean it. I don't just mean whether or not it looks diverse or whether or not it feels diverse, but actually being it at its core. And I'm passionate about making the Isle of Man a really, really good place. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Mr. Greenhill.
I think recognising what was great about the island. When I moved here, I didn't know enough. Now, I think we've really, my wife and I, recognised everything that's great about the island. We've got to keep that going, but I'll come back to that in a minute. With 85,000 people here, if I compare that back to a town near where I used to live, and I then look at the quality of every child in every sport, every man, woman and child in every sport, in every form of the arts, totally outperform here. We outperform here what I saw back in those other places. That's very special and that's very important to me. But I've also recognised that if I turn that into a governmental side of things, what's so important is that we generate the right economy that puts enough money into supporting all those people. And I think I mentioned it before, but we've got to have enough money in protecting healthcare, education, infrastructure, to do the things that we need to do in climate change. Those are vital. And we can only do that if the economy is growing and growing properly. So that to me is a passion.
Thank you. Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, to answer Mr. Robertshaw's question, fairness, justice, equality, proportionality, humanity and compassion. That's what I'm passionate about, deep down inside. I'm passionate about our Isle of Man, enriching our community. I'm passionate, as many of you know, helping vulnerable people, people who are at risk, our elderly, our fragile elderly, lonely elderly living at home by themselves, and people with mental health issues and the support that we can give them. Recognise the work that's going on, just saying what I'm passionate about and what I care most. Addressing hunger, cold and homeless, we are, but we need to do more. That's something of specific interest to me. And certainly helping where we can and improving that. So I guess enriching our community is the single biggest driver behind me. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question I have, Mr. Hooper.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. It's actually kind of building on that question. I was hoping just to ask, avoiding the big issues, because the big issues aren't going to be resolved by individuals, it'll need everyone pulling together. Avoiding those big issues that we're all aware of. If you are successfully elected next week, what is one thing, just one thing that you get to the end of your term and be able to look back on and say, I did that and I'm absolutely proud that that is something I was able to achieve during that 5 years?
Okay. Your one top priority, your one goal during your term as an MLC. We'll start with Ms. Houston.
I think that the main goal for me would be able to be looking back at the 5 years and think that we are better off where we left, where we started. The Isle of Man is in a better position for all of those big things that require everyone to come together. If I had to pick one thing, I think would be looking to contribute to the Human Tissue Act and in some way have that kind of come through, because I think that the Human Tissue Act is quite an old act, and I know that it's in the processes of getting updated, and that's really, really great. But I think it can actually be a really good foundation for things like research related to healthcare, and I think that could be really beneficial for the Isle of Man to be able to have that foundation and that that legal foundation to be able to then say, well, yes, maybe we can have universities coming over and doing research projects, and that could then again build upon skills and increase people coming to the island and settling and improving the skills that we have on island and the skills that we're actually cultivating and curating on the Isle of Man as well.
Mr. Green.
Rather than going for one specific piece of legislation or whatever, I think if at the end of 5 years, if the population better understands and appreciates the role that LegCo actually provides, I think we've done something absolutely right.
Okay. Mr. Henderson.
I think out of all the huge priorities we've got at the minute, it's got to be assisting and helping in whatever way I can with the health transformation programme that's going on at the minute. And it is my real wish that the work that's been undertaken now goes forward, and if there's anything I can do if re-elected, obviously in my political prowess or behind the scenes support or during debate or any legislative changes that have got to have taken place, I'd be only too proud to help in that and support the principles Sir Jonathan Michael has put forward, and for the initialisation of Manx Care. We've had a really in-depth report on the healthcare system, and anything that helps provide further, and the Department of Health and Social Care to deliver what our community need and supporting the Minister on that, I think that would be it.
Thank you. And Dr Hayward.
Obviously there's an election during 2021 and that's going to necessitate change in some view. Sorry if that's bad. There's got to be some level of continuity, and that will be what the next crop of Legco members that are elected, part of that is going to be their role, is to take that through. So I know there are a number of bills that are currently going through, and I'd like to think that there's a sort of a role there in order to make sure that those things don't disappear. The bills that we'll be working on, heavy programme before this case concludes, but it may not all happen. And I'd like to think that you could show that you'd taken part in an organisation where your role was actually to provide that little bit of continuity and stability running forward. If I was going to challenge one thing that I would like to look on, and it's a simple metric, but it has a very complex set of factors behind it. It worries me always that in the Isle of Man, in our education system, we come out with the same number of average 5 GCSEs percentage as the UK does, and yet we have 5 state schools that we're in a small cohort of children in which we should be able to do so much better. But that's not just about schools, that's about housing, and it's about access to facilities, and it's about healthcare as well. And so it's a metric that's quite a simple metric, with percentage getting 5 GCSEs or more, but I think we could be much more responsive. And if we took that as a challenge and said we wanted to set our education system up so that we looked better than anyone else, I don't see why that shouldn't happen. We have some superb teachers and some schools that are completely falling down, but we have lots of reasons why that would feed into it, and that would, I think, be one of the challenges that I'd like to sort of set for myself, would be to contribute to that change.
Thank you. Next question, Mr Harmer.
Thank you. And actually, the last 2 questions actually take a lot of what I was trying to say, but I'd like to drill down a little bit, and perhaps phrase it in a different way. Is there something that you think should be in the programme for government, or you'd like that you'd like to take forward? How would your experience deliver that change, and how would you see that progressing? So very much of, really underline where your passion is, and how your experience specifically could actually deliver that.
Okay, so what did the programme for government miss, or what part of it would you most like to pursue, and how would your skills help in that? First one up on that, Mr Greenhill.
Okay, rather than seeing something specifically missing from there, I think the most important thing is to be able to react as everything moves internationally. That's where I'm coming from. So it's recognising change in international business and what effect that might have on the island, positives and negatives. So that, to me, is the most crucial thing that I'd be looking at. That's where I've got the experience, that's where I can help.
Thank you. Mr Henderson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Thank you to Ray for the question. Building on previous, I think the programme for government, we all signed up to it, and it covers what's missing? It covers such a vast range of things, and it's been hitting so many targets over the last 4 years as well, or near targets, and the success that's been inputted back to Tynwell via report it is excellent. But I would, like others, major on international issues, keeping our eye on that. And one thing in particular I'm passionate about is environmental scanning management strategic tool, where we better anticipate what's coming over the horizon. And I think we're good at it, we do it, but I think we need to build on that and get better at it as we go forward, because the international pressures and challenges we are facing and will face, and then there's the unprecedented issues, such as out of the blue we get coronavirus. Pretty much out of the blue, Flybe we thought was saved, isn't saved. They're immediate international issues, and there's stuff we can be better at predicting, air pollution and so on, air quality on a global level, climate change. We need to get better at our general strategic predictions. And something I've also noticed on, when's the last time we did a review of any national strategic disaster planning? I'm sure we do look at the plans, but in overall terms, I think now's a good time to re-look at stuff and see, is it robust, is it resilient, Is it viable? Will it address what we're seeing? Will it address what we see possibly coming over the horizon? Work is good on. We have done some good work, but I'd like to see a building upon that.
Thank you. Dr. Hayward.
I think since the programme for government was written, obviously the recognition that climate change is going to become a much bigger issue, certainly for politicians, has come to the fore. And I think perhaps there were several bits of work that have been going on in the background. I was part of the Marine Biosecurity Committee, and we sat and we met and we talked about the threats, and we recognise where they are and we know how close they are. And that's as far as it sits. It never formulates itself into an actual strategy. And I think we don't necessarily have that forward-looking environmental resource management approach. The Marine Nature Reserves have obviously helped with that, and you can start to see, the impacts of those, and it's recognising those. But actually, with climate change comes even more pressure on that environment. We are not very good at doing biosecurity. We have Phytophthora, we have Chalara as well on the island, so they are affecting our woodlands and our plantations. And you can see that when you drive over the hills. And those were diseases that came in, and we're not really looking out there at that. And I think climate change has a possibility to exacerbate that. We're not quite at the level of southern England where you could start talking about malaria-carrying mosquitoes, but we will see different pressures, and we have, personally, I've seen a shift in marine life around the island. We're starting to see temperature effects in the sea. So it's real and it's happening, and I think I could contribute quite a lot to that debate, to be fair.
Ms. Hughes.
I think the programme for government, like it's been said, is quite large. There's quite a lot of within the range of it, and to try and think of what do I think that has been specifically missed off. I don't think it's any one particular thing, but something that I would like to see was so from my experience being within DHSC, I think that we always say we want to measure against something, but sometimes we don't put the measures in place before we do the thing to change. So what we're actually measuring or what we're reporting are things that we're doing really well at, and maybe not the things that we're not doing so good at, or vice versa. We're doing things really bad, but we're not reporting on the things that we're doing well, and we don't have the measures or the idea of what we want to report on before we put the implementation, before we implement, whether it's legislation or policy, before that gets implemented. So it gets mixed up in what's actually coming out in the report, and I think I'd like to see something a bit more structured around that.
Thank you. Next question, Ms. Edge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask all candidates from this administration, is there anything that's we've achieved that you think we shouldn't have gone down that route?
Question. So, what shouldn't we have done, Mr. Henry?
Just let me press the record. Ask that question.
No heckling from the crowd, please. Mr. Henry.
Shouldn't we have done? That's one of the best political questions I've ever heard in the 20 years I've been in here, to be quite honest. I mean, you could counter that with saying what shouldn't government be, what should government be getting up to, and really it should be having its fingers in everything from a strategic point of view, touching every quarter of our community with our strategic policy, legislation, assistance. From what I've seen of the programme for government, I mean, it's such a huge range of stuff. Perhaps to answer the Honourable Member in one way, perhaps what government shouldn't have done, maybe, from looking at the breadth of activities it's concentrated on, is possibly stretch itself too much, and you need to focus in a little bit. But to be fair to government, it's trying to be socially responsible. New administration really put its back into things. Ministers have been working flat out to make things work, drive policies forward. And in some areas this has been particularly successful. I'm very pleased with it. Climate change, conservation, and so on, health, mental health. But in other areas, I think we're a bit thin, and perhaps that's something that we you know, in hindsight, but we're here where we are and we've got to move forward, and I'm fully supportive of the objectives that we have.
Dr. Hayward.
Shouldn't have asked me this question. That's what we shouldn't have done. I'm trying to post myself as a critical friend here. Friends don't pop up and go, actually, do you know what? A really tough question, which I'm struggling to answer in all honesty. I don't think... I really struggle. There is so much going on in terms of government, and I know it echoes a little bit what Bill said. I was looking at the bills that are still in process, and I wonder if, because it was the sort of the first time that you've had a programme from government and then tried to work forward, everything seems to mature at the same time. And so perhaps what you shouldn't have done was set out as such a lick, because all of those bills, and you've put such pressure onto the draftsmen that are trying to draw up that legislation. I know it's involved using overseas draftsmen in order to come up with bills. So maybe you shouldn't have worked so hard.
Yes, Susan.
I really don't know how to answer that question. I don't know what shouldn't have been done, because I think that everything that was done, yes, you know, it seems like there's a lot, and there was a lot to get through, and it may have seemed that there's been stretched a bit thinly, but actually everything that was in the programme of government and everything that is coming through, the bills that are coming through, are actually things that needed to be done. So I don't know if there's actually anything that shouldn't have been done. I think maybe now we can go back and learn, maybe taking time on certain things, or actually giving more time and not try to rush. That maybe not try to get things through in haste, and that may be something that we could learn upon. But I don't think there's particularly anything that I don't think should have been done.
Mr. Greenhill.
Well, even sitting in the fourth seat, I don't think that's an easy question, I'm sorry. Basically, I think you shouldn't have argued so much. You should have agreed with everything with everybody, and it all would have gone through quicker. Other than that, I can't give you anything, I'm sorry.
Okay, next question, Mr. Robertshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why would you choose to stand for Legco as opposed to taking your courage in both hands and standing for keys?
Okay, starting on this occasion with Dr. Hayward.
I think my time when I've been in the chair at commissions, and the way it works is that you don't propose motions, obviously, when you're in the chair, but you guide the debate, and I found myself quite relishing the not having to drive policy, but having to guide how that policy is going to come in. You're right, it's a very brave move, isn't it, to go and knock on all the doors and stand for the keys. Instead, I have to face a room here this afternoon, and you're much more friendly than some of the people I knock doors for. But I actually think, because of how analytical I am, I actually think I'm kind of more detail focused than perhaps dealing with constituency work would allow me to be. So I think the finer focus of dealing with the scrutiny role would suit me better.
Yes, Susan.
I think that, I believe that my skill sets are more suited for the role of MLC rather than that of MHK, and that's basically what pushed me to stand for this role. And I think if the election process for standing for a member of Legislative Council was actually to via public election and to be going out and speaking to everyone in the public, then that would be the process that I would engage in. But it's not. It's not really a I want to be in Tynwald and therefore I'm going to go on this way instead of going on the other way. It's I want to do this role, and part of that is being in Tynwald.
Mr. Greenhill.
Why an MLC and not an MHK? Okay. Really, I've evolved my career over the last couple of years from being a CEO, managing director, where I created policy and implemented it to deliver results, to now being a non-exec director, a chairman or a consultant. And that's where I scrutinise plans and performance and mentor people, advise CEOs on how to change things and make them better. So I think today it's the right place for me to be an MLC and not an MHK. Thank you.
Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chris. I think my question should be why MHK to MLC in one way. spent a long time in the House of Keys and thoroughly enjoyed it. Gave up the position and career in the health service to do that as a full-time position. Many years in the Keys, MLC position comes along, or seat. I think I achieved what I wanted to at Keys as much as I could, and developing that experience and knowledge base into something a little different in Legco was quite a draw for me, because I had time then to look at things more strategically and from a step backwards, rather than the face-to-face coal-face work that MHKs get involved with, the operational stuff, and a whole plethora of reality that's presented on your desk every day. I still get that, but not as much. But what I really enjoy is being able to just stand back a little, take a breath, and look at what's before me with a little bit more time, so I can give it a more strategic look, if you like, ponder it a bit more, test it a bit more, take part in consultations more. If you ask Mr. Thomas, he'll tell me I'm involved in nearly everything that goes out, and I really enjoy getting stuck into the behind-the-scenes work, adding value there, testing, asking questions, or off my own bat. I will go off to departments and test their policies, ask them questions, look into forthcoming legislation, all sorts of activities that I can get involved with now and find it very rewarding, quite apart from the actual legislative council work, in scrutinising, examining legislation, and with that kind of breathing space in the way, so you can really get to grips with it.
Next question, Mr. Hooper.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I'm still reeling from the fact that no one could find a single government decision they disagreed with.
I'm not going to put the question back.
The question really does kind of follow on from that one. It's about the role that everyone's talked about scrutiny. I mean, Michelle's called it a critical friend, Bill said a second look. But then, on the other hand, there isn't anything that you think needed more work. So, actually, what do you all see as, when you say, oh, I think it's a scrutiny role, I think it's a critical, what do you mean by that? What does that actually entail? What does that part of the job mean to you?
Okay, what does scrutiny look like in practice, I suppose, is the question. And turning first to Ms. Hewson.
I think that I don't really like the word scrutiny. I think I've heard it so many times over the last few months that I think its meaning kind of gets lost when you're speaking about it. But I think in this case, in its simplest form, it would be looking at legislation and considering consideration of it clause by clause, and making sure that nothing actually is slipping through. But it's also looking at the detail and looking at whether or not the effect of legislation reflects the intention behind it. And an aspect of reviewing where we are currently, is there a need for change? And by looking at the policy, by looking at evidence of policy implementation through the review committees. And I think that what's really important about when we talk about things like being a critical friend or being in a scrutiny role is that in the centre of it shouldn't be solely to criticise, but to improve. So you can say that something is bad and you can go, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. But actually if you go, it's bad because of this and we should maybe do this instead, or it could be better if we did C instead of B, that would be what I think scrutiny is in practice.
Mr. Greenhill.
Okay, two important things about scrutiny. It's fine that everyone says that it's seeing what's in there and scrutinising what's there. I think it's very important to be able to scrutinise what isn't there, what's missing from what's been put in front of us. That was very interesting when I sat through the work on the domestic abuse bill, because things were picked up there, including stalking, age, removal of a 10-year limitation. There were things there that I can't tell were fully evaluated before, but certainly that's now started discussions going on and getting things moving. So there are some changes potentially coming through there, which I think are very important. So those two aspects, what's there and what's missing, I think are vital.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Larry, I think there's To me, scrutiny means a huge field of different things. It's not just sitting in Legislative Council on Tuesday morning looking at green pages. I feel it's so much more, and it's what you make of your job role and positive use of self into that, what you feed into your job and build it up as examination, asking questions, taking part in debates in Tynwald, challenging, questioning, going to departments, asking for meetings, testing out what it is that you're interested in or the policy that you've seen, posing questions in Tynwald, posing questions in Legislative Council, placing of motions. Scrutiny is such a huge subject, and to me it can mean everything and anything, as long as what you're doing is really examining, testing, probing, evaluating, understanding, providing clarity to, energising what it is that you're doing so that you're adding value to it somewhere along the way, or changing the direction of something, even by way of an amendment. You've put whatever it is under that element of scrutiny. So to me, it's a huge range of skill sets that I use, certainly, and it could be all encompassed under that thing, Laurie, so many and varied.
And Dr. Hayward.
I think it runs on a bit of a timeline, doesn't it? The initial look is that legislation going to achieve what the department was intended, and how what evidence was there that this legislation needs to come forward in the first place. Then it's have you got clashes with other legislation? Are there things missing? Are there things that could be better in there? And that involves some element of how do other jurisdictions do it. Although I spend lots of time telling my students that plagiarism is a really bad idea. In adult life, as we know, we all tend to look for the examples from other people as well. So I think as well looking at what consultations have happened over legislation and how that feedback was incorporated. It's fine going out to consultation, but you need to make sure that if you've got people who are interested enough to bother to respond, that you're actually seeing whether that was a valid comment and whether legislation needed amending. And then I think it comes on after the fact as well, because scrutiny has to involve saying, did that achieve what we set out to do? And that's quite a long-term strategy, because you need to go back and evaluate to review. Probably some of that legislation predates at least some of you by quite a way. Did it achieve what it was? It the bronze seal test? Did it do what it said on the tin? Does it work, and what evidence is there that it's working? So I think scrutiny actually cuts in across the lifetime of legislation and across a variety of areas.
Thank you. Next question is Mrs. Kane.
Thanks. Just a quick one really to establish how political you think you are. Where are you on the political spectrum? Have you ever been a member of a union or a political party? And if you did join a political party, which one do you think you're most in tune with?
Okay. So where are you on the political spectrum, and which are you talking about max political parties? Anywhere you like, anywhere across the world, which political party would you be a member of? We're going to start this one with Mr. Greenhill.
Right, I'm wearing a red tie. That doesn't mean what my political preference is. I should like to make that clear. In fact, if I'd got one with multiple colours on it, with whites, black, greens, oranges, that would have been absolutely right. I'm not a member of a union and never have been. Where do I see the political perspective here? I think it's not one of political parties, but one of government. And it's how that government then gets that balance right between bringing money in and spending it in the right places. That's crucial to me, and that's what I believe in very, very strongly. Did I miss anything from the question? There was no unions or no...
Which political party do you feel most affinity with?
It's certainly not red, because I want to get that balance, and I'm not sure that I could come up with a political party that was that balanced in raising things the right way, growing economies so as they could use that revenue to do things properly.
Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Daphne. I'm not of any particular political persuasion. It depends on what's happening at the time, whether I need to take a more conservative or a social view on things. I like a consultative mix in how I'm handling things. I need to be flexible, and I don't want to be constrained by a conservative thinking or a Labour thinking. I want my own experiential thinking and my heart to tell me what's what and to guide me, and possibly advice from friends as well. So I'm not of any particular leaning to any persuasion. I'm not a member of any political party, local or international. However, as many of you will know, I have always been a member of the Transport and General Workers Union, Unite now, in the background, non-pecuniary interest. I do try and help people who need assistance through their social security issues or otherwise. That's my kind of connection. Help with work-related issues constructively. I'm not in the business of causing face-to-face conflict. I'm a great believer in negotiation, consultation, pragmatism in that kind of field. But that's in the background. So to your answer, I'm a tie of all colours, if you like, and I think you should be, to enable you to get the best response or ideas or solution to something rather than being constrained into one particular camp.
Thank you. Dr. Hayward.
I won't give you a straight answer. I think I sit slightly left of centre. My experience of allowing free markets to have a run at things tells me that things like workers' rights and environmental rights tend to be pushed aside in terms of, in pursuit of profit, and that worries me. And it chimes with what I said earlier about, I think one of those roles of government is to protect their population from the harms that might be foisted on by business. That doesn't mean that you can't give business a free run at doing things, but there has to be some responsibility that they take there. So I would tend to be a little bit more of a tinkering one. I have been a member of the union in the past when I was at university and I was lecturing then. I was a member, but I'm not currently a member of the university. In terms of political parties on the Isle of Man, I think the lack of political parties has actually imbued this House with a more business-like approach. I think not having a party policy-driven approach has allowed members to have a greater input, and I think that's to its credit.
Mrs.
I think not coming from a political background kind of fills me with dread a little bit when I hear questions like this. But I think that one thing that this process has done for me has taught me a lot about the Isle of Man, but has also taught me a lot about myself. And I think that I identify more with progressive and liberal ideals, but I'm not officially part of the party, and I'm not part of a union, and I haven't been.
Thank you very much. Okay, everyone strap yourself in against Ms. Edge.
What's your view of government spending more than it's getting, and what do you think the major issue is?
Okay, so government finances, and we'll start on this occasion with Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think as we've demonstrated with this year's budget, we've demonstrated a phenomenal success in the general terms of that, and we've demonstrated a surplus, we've demonstrated what's going back into reserves. So, to answer your question, there is the proof of the pudding as far as that goes, but in the main, government is not allowed to spend more than it earns. It's not allowed to go in the red by the Treasury Act, so there's a constraint on government. But if you're thinking about wastage in certain areas, or accesses, or departmental or sectional overspending, you'd be quite right to highlight that. And I'd be quite right to say that government should be keeping an ever watchful eye on things like that, because I believe in zero wastage. I believe in trying to do things as effectively and as efficiently as you possibly can. And that should be a main driver behind the scenes. But I know in certain areas government culture is very difficult to change, and try and bring that ethos into a certain area or areas, very difficult to try and achieve.
Dr. Hayward.
Sound financial management has got to be a key aspect for any government, and government is basically a mechanism for distributing spending, isn't it? You've got some departments that are charged with raising revenue and will have a role in doing that, and then there will be other departments which will forever be where that revenue disappears to. And you hope that for those other departments, those ones such as education and health, that actually the long-term benefits from that are that you have a healthier, more educated society that feeds background into it. And so it's a constant battle. It's a battle, I think, for every organisation to make sure that it's trying to be responsible with financial management. I think you have to look at these things in the long term as well. It's taking 1 year's budget never truly reflects what the organisation is doing, and you'll know that when you perhaps your own household. There's some years where they're just big spend years because you put the extension on the house, but in the following years, because the heating bills have gone down, etc., you'll start recouping some of that.
Mrs.
I think that when it comes to spending more than it makes, or what the main reasons for this are, I think it comes down to, for me, an element of poor planning and budgeting, and possibly a lack of evidence as to where funds are being spent and how they're being spent before they are spent. And then again, I very much am for providing evidence for, and trying to get more of that, and better quality evidence for what's going to be spent and where it's going to be spent, and if there is a department that is at risk of constant overspending, I think that again should be a flag for people to go, well, if it's constantly overspending, can we not try and preempt that in some way, and look at where big chunks of finances are being lost. So I think it would come down to planning.
Mr. Greenhill.
I think we should, of course, be aiming for a balanced budget. Reserves are there for a reason, and I think we could be facing a time ahead of us now when those reserves may well be needing to be pulled upon with things like the virus and with what's happening with Flybe. There may well be challenges ahead of us in other ways as well. I think we've got to be prepared for that. That's where we should be.
Thank you. I've got 2 more left on my list, so if there's any more, then otherwise I'll ask those 2 to go and then I'll sum up. Okay. Mr. Collister.
Yeah, just a simple question for me. I just want to ask the candidates if they're truly prepared for the media attention that comes with the role of being a Timberland member.
Are you ready to be a FAC magnet? First one, Dr. Hayward.
Yeah, bring it on. There you go.
Ms. Houston.
I think that in light of recent events, I am a lot more prepared than I would have been at the beginning of this process. I think that a lot of members that I met with did say you are going to be under criticisms, and you're going to be scrutinised yourself as a person, and I think that, yes, I am prepared, and I think I can deal with it, and I think that everyone kind of has to expect that there is going to be some level of criticism, and if it's to do with their ability or their skills to perform the role, then that's something that should be expected, and I think that's what should be expected when members are saying to have a thick skin. I don't, however, believe that protected characteristics should be a reason for you not being able to do the role, and I think if stuff like that does come about, I hope that I've showed that I'm not afraid to call attention to that, and look at things when they maybe need a little bit more looking at.
Mr. Greenhill.
This isn't the first time I've sat in front of that camera or the other one over there on Ireland, so that's been certainly with my football side, but very definitely with my side of promoting the island in all areas of business DFE when I was doing that. In addition to that, I've spent a lot of time with international radio and TV, again promoting the island, making sure that the message gets across and people really realise what a great place this is. That's vital, which means you're still going to get some nasty questions when you're being asked things in that sort of environment, but I think I've got some experience of dealing with that.
Ms. Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Rob, for that question. The straight answer is yes, absolutely. It's something I am used to, but always being careful with it as well. And If you're carrying the flag for a particular political cause, yes, you can trumpet your way through the press and you might get more media, you'll get support. But as we've already heard, your performance will be under scrutiny. If you underperform, you'll be criticised. You have to be ready for that, and you have to be able to answer to whatever that is. But in the round, yes, you make yourself as prepared as you can be for media exposure at any particular time, but don't take anything for granted. You just do your homework and work on that particular aspect as and when it arises.
Final question then, Mr. Robertshaw.
Thank you. Currently, there's a deal of turbulence around the whole issue of wokeism, safe spaces.
You missed one, you didn't ask Michelle.
I beg your
No, I did. She said bring it on.
I did.
Right?
Sorry, you said it was a short, sharp question, and I said, yeah,
Oh,
bring
yeah.
it on.
Bring it
That
on.
was my short, sharp answer.
I missed that.
Short answer as well.
Yeah. Right, so, Mr. Robertshaw.
Thank you. There's a great deal of turbulence at the moment around the issues of wokeism, safe space and free speech. What's your view?
Okay, wokeism in safe spaces. We start with Ms. Hewson.
Safe spaces and
Wokeism and free speech.
free speech.
It's a major discussion.
What is it?
I think that free speech is something that everyone has the right to. And it is something that is part of who we are as individuals, and everyone has a right to an opinion, and this is going to be drawing on personal experience. I think that we need to be able to protect people within our population and within our society from free speech, I think, turning into hate speech. And there's a fine balance and there's a fine line, and with things, you know, the way that the world is changing with things like social media, and with a great really quick access to information, and not always the right information. I think that there is definitely some way that we could work in making sure that people and on the Isle of Man and within our population and around the world are safe from that, and that free speech isn't something that's going to turn into hate, and it isn't something that is going to then have a knock-on effect to the population in terms of how they feel, whether or not, because I think if you have things that turn into hate and then it affects a person's mental health. I think there's a lot of talk recently about how the media looks at people and the effect on people for that reason. So I think that free speech is something that's always going to be part of who we are, and it's something that we should all be allowed.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Kind of rambled a bit there.
Mr. Green.
Very similar response to that. Certainly protecting free speech, but not if that free speech then goes over the top and does the wrong things at the wrong time, in the wrong way. And the other area that didn't come up, and I'm not sure if it's included in your question or not, but also protecting whistleblowers, to me is very important.
Mr. Henderson.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, I'll just stop the stopwatch because I want to just have free speech, wokeism, and what was the other one?
Safe space.
Safe space. Yeah. Absolutely supportive of all those principles, and I think it's something that we need to enshrine as our own personal values as much as we try, and into our national policy standards. We do, and maybe not as much, and we can do more. We can always do more, and certainly as far as free speech is concerned, I think that's an intrinsic value of our society and should be respected at all costs and cherished. Wokeism, I take you're looking at what's good around us, what's good in our workplace, new ideas, embracing new things. I'm up for that. Mr. Speaker doesn't agree with that, but I'm trying to get a concept of what we're here. And safe space, I assume, Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about there is that you should feel safe in your environment, your street, supermarket.
Linked with
Sorry.
certainly free speech should be cherished at all costs. There's no question about it.
I wasn't disagreeing with Mr Henderson. I was trying to communicate to the Chief Minister that the question list had closed. Dr Hayward.
In terms of free speech, if we're going to start there, I think I defend anyone's right to say what they want to say. However, they don't have the right to have that viewpoint listened to if it is against certain principles. So if it's wrong, if it incites hatred, it's bigoted, or it's damaging, then we have laws within society that protect that. That doesn't mean I don't think that we have to necessarily quash free speech, but I think what we have to do is we have to deal with people who would believe that it's fine for them to say absolutely anything, because there are boundaries that come on that. What we're after, obviously, is a courteous society with some professional attitudes and things like that. And if you look in what's happened even this week in schools and with bullying in schools, I see a general decline as people become more. And the keyboard warriors are always great. The keyboard warriors after 9 o'clock at night always worry me even more. They can say all sorts of things. But you're seeing in schools that level of bullying is still right. And I think it's pervasive on society. And it concerns me enormously that we somehow have to defend a courteous society that allows free expression, but without overstepping the boundaries into hate.
Now, as previously advertised, we're going to now give every one on the panel the opportunity to sum up. As we've gone through the roads with different people starting at different times, I will continue with that. And so the first one to give 3 minutes more speech will be Mr Greenhill. So your time starts now.
I must admit, this has felt like a bit of a combined grilling from Andrew Marr and Sophie Ridge to some degree. I believe that personal discussions I've had with you all, my answers to questions this afternoon, have given you some insight into how my extensive international business knowledge, skills and experience can meet the requirements of an MLC and fill a gap in Parliament, and how I could be of benefit to that process. Over the past few weeks, I've dedicated my time to meet with you all, to watch the meetings in the House of Keys, Ledgeco and Tynwald Court, to understand some of the policies and the procedures and the interaction between members. I've also been looking at the bills that have been processed through the system at the moment, so that if I do receive your vote to become a member of the Ledgeco, I can hit the ground running, or at least walk in quickly. I hope the combination of my extensive business, government, sports, arts and interpersonal skills and experience can convince you of what I can add to government and to the people of the Isle of Man. This evening the four of us can now relax and try to recover from today's ordeal, but you've all got to go through it again tomorrow, so good luck with that.
Thank you. Mr Henderson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm deeply committed to our island and care passionately for our community and people. Consequently, I believe the best way for me to support and energise our community, economy and our island is by progressing and adding value to our legislative and Tynwald process through the continuation of my work and application of my broad political and government experience, primarily in the Legislative Council, in Tynwald and any government department I may be able to serve on, should I be re-elected. Also by applying the principles of reasonableness, equality, fairness and compassion, which I have always strived to achieve despite recent inaccuracies on this. The island faces many issues and challenges going forward in community, domestic and international terms. For the benefit of our economy, community, we have to function in an international environment and be part of the global community in this context, balanced against being especially conscious of national or community issues, but with an ability to be outward-looking and demonstrate that we are a responsible jurisdiction meeting our international obligations and standards which we strive to achieve. To manage all these conditions effectively and produce successful outcomes, we must maintain an appropriate, responsive and high-quality legislative and national policy framework, critical to our success. Therefore, legislation must be submitted to and transit a robust and rigorous two-tier examination and scrutiny system to achieve the best we can. I am well acquainted with and experienced at all levels of this process, from policy inception, draft legislation, to Keys and Ledgeco scrutiny, national policy being examined in Tynwald, which I have shown to be an active and constructive participant. Environmental scanning is an essential and critical strategic planning element informing any national legislative and policy framework so that we can better manage issues, produce improved solutions and quality outcomes by anticipating what is coming over the horizon. Proactive planning, something I have always strongly supported and been involved in. I bring with me the principles of pragmatism, team working, joint working, flexibility, patience, positive use of self, all key to this legislative and policy process and for our political, economic and community success. It is also important to strive to build professional working relationships. I also bring continuity and an in-depth working experience, knowledge of our political processes, structures and departments. I have a proven track record in all these essential requirements and, if re-elected, commit to continue to use these skill sets and principles, enabling me to add value in these important legislative and policy processes in the Legislative Council, supporting the House of Keys and Tynwald.
Thank you. Okay.
Firstly, can I say how much I've enjoyed Hustings this afternoon, and if that isn't insane enough to get a vote, it's been a great intellectual challenge. The range of questions is quite something. Although there's a job description for the role, it's clear there's lots of additional aspects to being a member of Ledgeco, and I've found out quite a lot of those when I started this process. And as I mentioned before, I wasn't born here, but I've had the privilege to be able to choose to live here and to raise my family in the Isle of Man, and this is my forever home. I think that my background and wide range of experiences give me an excellent perspective. The timing of this election sits well with my local government role, which concludes in April, and I would have hated the thought of leaving mid-term, not just because it's going to cause an expensive by-election, which will throw the finances out, but also because leaving any job that's part-finished just isn't my style, I'm afraid. The next House of Keys election will see a new programme of government, and this House has got a lot of businesses getting on with it at the moment, but sometimes it's not within government's ability to control the situation, and in the next few weeks the challenges of things like Flybe's collapse and the impact of coronavirus is going to require some creative thinking and some quick responses. Post-Brexit, the UK is undoubtedly going to have an impact on the Isle of Man, and whether Whitehall chooses to go down the route of equivalence in legislation or to go for some sort of competitive distinction, there's going to be action required from government with legislation to support that. I witnessed first-hand to the effects of climate change on our precious biosphere, and the sad reality is that the predictions of climate change have been around since before I was born. And it's until the effects become evident, it's really hard for politicians to justify and to implement a response. But now's not the time to be timid about that. The current report and the recent budget commitments are the first steps, and I think there's a strong evidence-based approach needed to make sure that we pass on something that is better for our children, not entirely uninhabitable. I'm already contributing to things like marine biosecurity and fisheries management, and I've changed land management practices in ports and areas as well. So there are small changes that you can start making. I believe that input from Ledgeco is essential for good government. It tests and challenges assumptions and presents ideas to help develop the very best legislation. And after all, I think that's what we're all meant to be here for. Scrutiny committees are forming a vital part of the review process, and one where Ledgeco members can make a massive contribution. The Ledgeco members are like non-executive directors, but they've got a nationally important role to play. And when it comes to ballot next week, I hope you consider me worthy of your endorsement and allow me to make my contribution to that. Thank you.
And Ms. Susan.
I'd just like to start by saying thank you for all of your questions. I did a lot of preparation, and not a lot of the ones I prepared for came up, so it was like going to an exam blind. And I hope that some of the answers that I've given or points that I've made have been able to instill confidence in my ability to do the role should I be successful, and the commitment I have to learning more about it and really giving it my all. This process has been really enjoyable, and it's taught me a lot about the inner workings of Tynwald, the inner workings of Keys and the inner workings of Ledgeco, and it's also taught me a lot about myself. What's become apparent is that there's actually a lot of work to be done in terms of clearing up some of the misconceptions that the public has about Ledgeco, its functions and its importance. And I believe that I have the integrity, passion and fresh perspective to be able to bring something to that. It's also shown me that we have, as an island, come a long way. We are very progressive, but like there always will be, there is there is room for improvement on our view for representation and integration. These, amongst others, would be tough conversations to have, and I would really like the opportunity to have open discussions with members of Tynwald on how to address these for the future, and how to ensure that with future elections or future positions that we actually have such a wide range of candidates like we do today. It's really, I'd really like to wish everyone the best of luck, and it's humbling and great to see such a wide range of skills present. Thank you for your time, and I hope I get the opportunity to contribute to the work of Legislative Council in the coming time.